Key. Sugar butties, she said under her breath. Sugar butties. Ruby was starting to get agitated now. Where was the key? She rummaged through her school bag and patted her pockets. Don't forget your key, her foster mother said every morning when they were rushing around, trying not to bump into each other in the tiny kitchen. I'll probably have to work late again. Ruby had been taught to say sugar butties instead of some of the words she used to say when she still lived with her stepdad. But now, as she upended her bag and its contents fell on the pavement, some of those old words began to come into her mind, and tears started to prickle. There was no key. Don't cry, don't cry. She was getting angry. Angry tears, not sad ones. She fiercely rubbed her knuckles into her eyes and said some of the old words out loud. She looked up and down the road. It was nearly dark. No one around. Good. But then her head flicked round and she caught sight of a group of teenage boys sauntering along on the opposite side of the street. They were laughing, jabbing punches, pulling at each other's bags, falling into the road. As they got closer, Ruby got more frantic. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted to be inside the house. She couldn't get in. She couldn't get away. By the time the boys reached the flats where Ruby lived, she was huddled against the wall, her school bag over her head. She knew it was weird, but for a while now she had found that if she hid her face from the world, she felt better. Sometimes she would walk round the house with a cardboard box on her head. Now that her foster mother Julia had got to know her better, she realised that it was best to let Ruby do what she needed to do. They had got into too many fights early on, and frankly, Julia didn't know how else to deal with Ruby's outbursts. The boys' voices got closer and louder. Ruby waited for the taunts, and in the meantime she took herself to Italy. This was another trick she had learnt. Take yourself away, somewhere nice, and wait for the inevitable. It is Italy, Rome to be precise, and it is 40 degrees. Lots of elegantly dressed, beautiful people are milling about. Ruby watches them drift past her. She wants to look beautiful too. Her eyes fall to her feet. That seems a good place to start. Exchange the scruffy trainers for a pair of lovely leather sandals with tiny, delicate straps. Ruby looks in the Italian shop windows, but the shoes are all too expensive. She could actually hear the boys' shoes scuffing the pavement now. It wouldn't be long. Now she is on a train, still in Italy, but on her way to the beach. She has her dog with her, a friendly old thing called Jimbo. They arrive at the coast, jump off the train and run to the beach. Ruby lies on a towel, and Jimbo chases seagulls. As he is scampering about, he tramples over an old woman who is sunbathing. The old woman sits up and shouts at the dog. When she realises the dog belongs to Ruby, she shouts at her too. Ruby starts to get angry, because that's what happens when people shout at her. This wasn't working. Now Ruby was angry in her daydream and terrified in real life. The boys' laughter was really loud now, really close. She held her breath. Ruby calls Jimbo, takes hold of his collar, and together they walk through the holidaymakers to the little caravan they have rented. She opens the door of the caravan and locks them both in. She felt the push on her shoulder. She was expecting it. Inside the school bag, the air was hot and damp. She took a gulp of it and started to sob. Another push on her shoulder. Hey, what are you doing with that on your head? Ruby froze. Perhaps if she kept completely still, they would stop bothering her and move on. She could hear murmuring, but the laughter had stopped. The caravan feels like home. The next day she will go into the village nearby and buy some Italian flip-flops. Ruby tried desperately to keep focused on her Italian fantasy. One of her social workers had helped her to calm down by talking her through an imaginary adventure. It was harder on her own, though. Her mind kept letting bad thoughts creep in. Sometimes, when her foster brothers and sisters were arguing all around her, and she could feel herself getting more and more anxious, she would cover her ears, shut her eyes, and hum to herself. She tried humming now, very quietly. Oi, what are you doing? She realised now that it was a stupid idea to sit down on the pavement. The bag over her head didn't make her disappear. It just made her look ridiculous. Why hadn't she run away? It was too late now. She had her back to a wall and she was surrounded. Are you okay? Ruby stopped humming. Quickly she raised her hands to her head, pushing the bag up above her eyes. One of the boys was looking straight into her face, his eyes level with hers as he crouched in front of her. She caught her breath and tried to push herself away from him, scrambling to her feet. She was breathing hard and fast, and another sob escaped. The boy stood up too and took a step towards her. Immediately Ruby's arms flailed. "What? Hey, no need for that." Ruby saw that he was holding up his hands in surrender. She let out a kind of deep growl, like a bear guarding its cave. And as she realised that the boys' voices were not taunting, but concerned, she sank back against the wall and sobbed harder. Julia didn't know what to make of it. Her long days at work made her irritable by the time she got home. She pushed open the kitchen door with her foot and staggered in with 2 bags of food from the 24-hour supermarket. Then she dropped the shopping and stared. Squeezed into the kitchen were 7 teenagers with cardboard boxes on their heads, humming madly like a swarm of bees. Ruby was in the middle, conducting the humming with a wooden spoon and a bread knife. One by one they stopped making a racket and lifted their cardboard headgear. They shuffled uncomfortably. Then Julia burst out laughing, and she didn't stop until tears ran down her face. Ruby offered her foster mum a paper bag with eye holes cut out of it, and the orchestra started up again, with a joyous rendition of Nellie the Elephant, hummed furiously and tunelessly, with more energy than either Ruby or Julia could remember in a long while. When Ruby and Julia looked back at how things had taken a turn for the better, they thought of this as the day when one key was lost and several others were found.